vai. Mi piano a come sapere pesa. Mira pari un poco tabing. Mira papà un cantità. Il cantità di Kiko? Ah, ti contavo. Yeah, ma esa mi cara wa poco leo. Ma mira poco sumita bini. E según nanta cana nanta baglia. Nanta pula nell'area sin control. Mira pari un poco tabing. Mira papà un cantità. Mi povertà hasi, ma in cami curva de mondi. Mondi di Kiko, ah well. Sumi kuta canta calypso.
Welcome at the 12 decolonial learning sessions of RLS. Of course, I have done this introduction already, but now it's being recorded, so that's very nice. Yesterday, we heard it that we are opening the country after the COVID crisis. And of course, the global health, it was a daily topic for all of us. But to be honest, what is health? What is health meaning to us? So I think we're going to find out with the amazing presentation of Durwin Lynch. So let me first give a brief introduction of Durwin. He's originated from the Dutch Caribbean. He was born in Suriname, raised in Curaçao, and has a strong interest in addressing inter- and transgenerational trauma healing of Dutch Caribbean subcommunities. He works as a PhD researcher on the topic of public engagement in science at the Athena Institute, Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And he's also the program coordinator of the Master Management, Policy Analysis, Entrepreneurship in the Health and Life Science. So what is the program of today? Well, during this decolonial learning session, Durwin will touch upon intergenerational and transgenerational traumas of the Dutch Caribbean subcommunities in relation to colonialism, racism, and oppression. So in his view, embracing traditional healing practices that have been, in general, being kept invisible throughout history, might support actually healing processes of inter- and generational trauma. So he will focus his talk on exploring the deeper rooted tensions that both support but also hinder the coexistence of traditional and conventional Western medicine healing in the Dutch Caribbean. So what are the historical roots of these tensions, and to what extent is a potential bridge between traditional and conventional Western medicine healing desirable and maybe even possible? So we have this structure. So let me give you first structure of how we're going to do it. We have first a presentation of Durwin. Then we have a break. After the break, we're going to do a breakout session. So participants go into smaller groups to discuss content. After the breakout sessions, we will have the Q&A with Durwin. So that is something I really look forward to because I have questions myself for sure. So let us start with the presentation. Durwin, are you ready to do this?
I'm ready to do so, and thank you for having me. Good evening to everybody. So this is my beginning, my starter slide. Bombini. And for some of you, this is a familiar. Bombini means welcome. Welcome to a presentation of research that I am doing that started a couple of years ago. And I decided to keep the original title of my research, what I wanted to do, intact. And today I invite you, and thank you, Aralis, for inviting me here, to engage in my collective brain on this topic. So it's on toward integrated mental health care in the Dutch Caribbean, where I explore further opportunities and barriers for collaboration between traditional healers and biomedical practitioners. Please do know that this title was the intact title that I used in 2016 when I requested a small funding for this project. First, what is this talk not about? Although the topic is very interesting, it's also very personal to me. And in talking about it and doing this research, I am very aware that I am not here to explore within my own communities as an outsider looking at a phenomena. So I'm not here just to describe traditional healing and how it is and then leave it. I am part of it. I am from the Dutch Caribbean. Like in the introduction was mentioned, I come from Suriname. I've lived on the island of Curacao. And it's by no means that I want to like expose a culture out there. No, I'm trying to understand the culture where I come from and the environment where I come from. It's also not about the ingredients of different herbs or yeah, it doesn't really, my talk is not really about explaining exactly all the details of traditional healing. I think it's better if I start saying what interested me in this topic and maybe a little bit of who I am. So I work at Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and I'm doing a PhD on a totally different topic. So my topic is on the role of citizens, the public, in the sustainability transition. I've also been teaching for over 5 years now, research methods. The course that I'm coordinating is called Research Methods for Analyzing Complex Problems. And it is within, from this field, my daily work, and a particular interest that I've always had towards my own culture, my own, yeah, where I come from, that I wanted to connect those two. I wanted to use research and methodological skills that I was focusing on in my PhD and in my regular work to understand better where I come from, the communities where I come from. And it started as a hobby. It started as a small hobby, and I was very much inspired once by a poem of an artist from Curacao, Kevin Osepa. He wrote a small poem on Facebook in which he talked about brua. And brua was, at that time, for me, also something exotic. But I was very, it caught my attention. Why? Because in that poem, the artist actually asked, why is brua our, and he also described as our traditional healing, traditional medicine, such a taboo topic? Why can't we embrace it more? And I found out later, more recently, I found out that artists are the first intellectuals. They know the stuff before researchers. Artists, activists, they are the first intellectuals to explore and to dive into societal topics that are sometimes even more taboo. And this is exactly what happened. So when I read that poem a few years ago, I got interested by that word brua. I wanted to understand brua a little bit more, and I dove into some literature back then. And one of the first articles that I found was this one from 2015, Traditional Healing Practices Originating in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. And it was very much focused on psychiatry. At that time, it was also one of the first, the first article that I co-authored with a colleague, which was on integrative health, mental health care in India. And it was a beautiful article, beautiful story, but those puzzle pieces together, my work, my interest in traditional healing, integration, that and the poem that inspired me to request a small grant funding at the Sylvia de Groot Fonds, that's of the Koninklijk Instituut voor de Taal en Volkenkunde, KITE LV. I'm very appreciative to the grant that I received back then, to do a research on what I proposed then to be the following. My initial aim was to start this research as a hobby and to find out whether we can contribute to a better, whether my research can contribute to a better collaboration between biomedical mental health practitioners and traditional healers, by gaining a more in-depth understanding of how traditional healing manifests itself on contemporary Dutch Caribbean, and explore opportunities, barriers, and strategies for integrated mental health care from all the perspectives, from all relevant perspectives. So as you can see, it's a very loaded aim, and it's maybe very subtle, a very subtle activist in me that immediately thought the good thing to do is to strive towards a collaboration. And maybe that is also the naive me, that's what I wanted. But I also needed to understand how traditional healing was manifested nowadays in the Dutch Caribbean, because there was not much literature. Much of the literature was a bit older. There's quite some literature on traditional healing on other islands in the Caribbean, but less from where I came from. And I decided to focus on mental health. I could have also taken it way broader, healthcare in general, but somehow back then I wanted to focus on mental health. And I knew that I had to explore this from all relevant stakeholder sides. Now, because I did this as a hobby, I don't spend all of my time during the week doing this research. So I also had to carefully plan and think when would be suitable for me to go back home, and which home, really Curacao, or should I go back to Suriname as well, all the islands? In any case, I had to go back to the setting because I've been living here now for 10 plus years, almost 16 years now. And back then it was 12 years. I was out of the context a little, for quite some time. Yet I wanted to do this research myself. So my data collection, it consists of two actual times that I actually went to Curacao. And the first one was a field visit in 2017 of 8 weeks. And I spoke to different people who consider themselves a traditional healer, people who were referred to as a traditional healer. And in this talk, I have chosen not to be very academic on all the definitions. I am talking about my research as it happened, the most honest way as it happened. I am not a historian, I am not an anthropologist, but what I do is trying to understand perspectives, different perspectives, and in my own setting now. So traditional healers I interviewed, local experts on the topic, but of course, members of the community. If I wanted to understand more of contemporary traditional healing, I needed to speak to people themselves too. And for those of you who don't know, so Curacao is part of the Dutch Caribbean. It's now an autonomous island within the Dutch kingdom. For me, the Dutch Caribbean continuously with, between brackets, the former Dutch Caribbean, Suriname is also inherently part of this. Because as I came to find out through my research, to understand traditional healing nowadays, we cannot see that separately from understanding our colonial history. And it goes hand in hand to understand both, and I think also to move forward. So the members of the community that I also interacted with were, in some cases, close people from my own inner circles, because it is quite a taboo topic to talk about mental health and to talk about traditional healing. And those are the two beautiful words to describe it. Because in the beginning, I also mentioned that I was initially inspired by the word brua. But soon I came to find out already before I went to my first field visit that brua is not the appropriate term to use. If you want to understand this in a more constructive way, brua has a negative connotation and it has its own history. So I also needed to break, the barriers that would make it more difficult to talk about this topic. And while living here in the Netherlands, I don't get a chance to really build on, the rapport, the trust between the locals or these people to talk about it. In any case, my first field visit focused more on traditional healers and local experts. And now I recently came back from a second field visit, which was a bit shorter and also a bit hampered by the COVID circumstances there, but still I managed to have quite some interviews with people, some face-to-face, some online. And I also managed to now engage a little bit more biomedical perspective. So psychiatrist, psychologist, and I spoke to a GP. And I'm mentioning both of these things right now. So as my data collection, you can see that it is evolving with time. So I didn't start immediately with exploring all the different stakeholders. And there are still a few stakeholders that I would need to explore. And I'm talking now about stakeholders. Why? Because my initial aim was to bring everybody together, to work towards that visible collaboration, which was, I'm not sure whether that is, we'll come to that in a few. First, I present a few of my highlights that I mean, these are still my findings, 5 years busy with this research, and I think I will remain, involved in this topic for some more time, because besides being very interesting, it's very satisfactory to understand more of my own communities, my own background. So what is, according to what I found, people that I spoke with, readings that I did from my research, even though I'm not an anthropologist, what is traditional healing? What do we mean by it? It seems that it's not necessarily a new thing. It has been coexisting next to biomedical, mental health care on Curacao, both as an Afro-Caribbean religion and as an alternative and or complementary medicine practice. The few, again, I did qualitative research. I interviewed, I spoke to people, informal and formal. Some wanted to get recorded, others not. Both views are there, it's partly a religion and it's also a medicinal practice. And there are diverse terminologies. Remember back then, I thought everybody was just brua. No, I soon found out that if I wanted to really dive into the topic with those who knew about it, I had to also be open to how they refer to traditional healing or traditional healers. You have the sanador, the curadero, a montador, trajador, hacidor de misterio, hacidor de brua. I just want to mention that hacidor de brua, literally meaning the doer of brua, with brua meaning, mix, how do you say? Brua is almost like witchcraft. It's negative. And that those terminologies have also been used historically by other groups. They can be the church, they can be the colonial oppressors, to condemn the traditional healing practices of the locals, the family of the slaves, the former slaves. and later on also other groups that were contracted to work after the slavery was abolished. So that in Suriname. So there are diverse terminologies, and depending on which one you use or are aware of, you get insights into, oh, so that's how they make sense of traditional healing. The functions of a traditional healer are linked to, they are very diverse. Some people, they can be very religious. It can be very traditional. For example, my parents do it, or within my family it's done. I do it as well, or I take those customs. I do them as well. It can be very cultural. It can be healing. It can be medicinal. It does seem, compared to Western biomedical medicine within the communities of the Dutch Caribbean, that the traditional healing seems to address and tap more into the spiritual and mental well-being of people. So the traditional healers are consulted for aspects such as acceptance of illnesses, around death, around birth, worries, fears. So really way more things that have to do with mental well-being. There they seem to tap into more. Of course, also for more biological health deviants or illnesses, those as well. It also seems that, well, it doesn't seem, this is what happened. The traditional healing practices, they developed in order to coexist, in order to survive. They did, got influenced by other religions, Afro-Caribbean religions, such as Santeria, Voodoo, Winti, but they also adapted to the artifacts available on the island to support rituals or to support the traditional healing belief itself. Also, migration throughout the Caribbean has led to more adaptations of the traditional healing as it coexists nowadays. I don't think it is possible to say this is the traditional healing practice on Curacao and it's similar to the one in Suriname. There are many, many similarities between Voodoo, Santeria, Winti, the traditional healing on Curacao. There are many, but there are also differences, nuances. They're very contextualized. And when taking into account the history of colonialism and decolonization aspects, how, for example, in education, how in, for example, in the role of other dominant religions, that the role that they have played over the last decades, you would understand more, we would understand more, and also gain more insight into how the traditional healing practices have been coexisting all these times. So during my up to now, I mean, I went twice for a field visit, but when I came back, I did most of my reflections and I did most of working out my data. I did some more reading. The more I got to understand that coexisting of the traditional healing is way stronger than I thought. It's not something that is broken and that I need to fix. It is not necessarily a collaboration that I need to enforce. Still, I was interested to know then what are those barriers and facilitators for understanding, at least then, that coexistence, and how can we influence or shape collaboration more? Two interesting quotes that I have that I got in 2017 was somebody that told me that nowadays traditional healing consults even happen in a Starbucks, where you might have thought those are only in some hidden areas. No, it's way more embraced. It's maybe invisible, but it is there. One of my gatekeepers that in 2017 allowed me to understand from his perspective way more of traditional healing, said to me very, very early, if you were white, I would not have spoken to you. And while I did joke and laugh about it when he said it to me, it is, I think, an important quote to understand if we want to understand the deeper rooted tensions that hinder or also in a way keep intact the traditional healing as it is nowadays. So, of course, I wanted to know what kind of opportunities there are for collaboration, because like I said, I'm not a historian in the sense that I appreciate the work of historians a lot. I think it's amazing what body of knowledge nowadays we get to know or being exposed to understand our history. My focus is on healing in the now. How do we move on from where we are? So while I do appreciate all history, I am not a historian in the sense that I continuously am looking for how do we move forward. And one way is to look for opportunities for collaboration. So while I was trying to understand more of traditional healing as it is now, I also explored these areas for collaboration. And what you see, so coming from my perspective of traditional healing was that it was very taboo. People don't really talk about it, which is still the case if you ask around. But there is, if you look into the last decades, you do see that there is an increased recognition of the traditional healer, however he is defined, and especially for mental health care, has potential to serve biomedical Western healthcare on topics of empowerment, acceptance, and processing. And if I look at my friends or those around me, these are not necessarily topics that we talk about easily with a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I come from a generation of friends where we used to say, if you go to colleges, you must be crazy. Back then, that was the dominant thought of mental health care. And it might still be the same now, or it might not have changed a lot. I'm not living there. So as a researcher, doing this research continuously, I also look within my inner circle. What can I learn from my inner circle to understand those bigger processes out there? In any case, there is an increased recognition of this traditional healer. There is also more societal appreciation and acceptance for them, especially the sanado, the one dealing with herbalism. There are now very popular, or I don't know if I can say popular, but there always were, you have very famous people on the island, such as Dina Veres, who always had herbs and who had a lot of knowledge of herbs, oral knowledge of herbs and how they can actually help people with different illnesses. What you see nowadays is that there's even a herb store prominent in a commercial mall in Curacao. It's more, I wouldn't say in your face, it's more open. It's more out there. I went to one, and while standing in the shop, I could hear a lady talking about something about her child, her hair, and for what she needed some help. And she got, it was like a live pharmacy, but based on traditional herbs. And for me, that was new. for me, that it has its place in society. So, and that is very important, whether you call this market demand or you call it societal acceptance, it is what resonates with people. So the sanado, the herbs person, also seems more positive and open for collaboration. And I'm talking here about collaboration with biomedical professionals. Oh, sorry, I'm a bit verkouden. Compared to the montado. And this is just one reference to the traditional healer who is more in contact with spirits, ancestral spirits, for example, or other spirits. I think there is a little bit more reluctance to embrace the montado compared to the sanador. Again, it is very complex on the islands because of how many influences there are and how hidden and taboo it has been all of these times, and the influences of religion, the political system, etc., made it very difficult to be open about it. And you can see now that the appreciation is more towards the herbalism from my findings compared to the other one. Some traditional healers recognize the limits of their own healing practices, because if you think of collaboration, I think it would be great if you can refer to each other, right? If, for example, initially when I started this research, I was wondering, I kind of like heard already somewhere that within the biggest mental health care institute on Curacao, they allow for the patients to have traditional healing beds or consults, however you would like to name them, with traditional healers if they desire this. I wanted to know, is the other way also possible? Would a traditional healer, as identified as traditional healer, be open, willing to refer people to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist? That was my idea back then of collaboration. So referral is an important element or factor if you want to talk about collaboration. So that was also something I was wondering. And what seems to happen is that there are, for example, traditional healers that refer their clients to other traditional healers internationally. So they recognize that for certain aspects that they are being consulted, that they cannot, that they prefer to refer them to a more validated traditional healer internationally, rather than referring it to a biomedical practitioner. So an important step in this collaboration is to recognize the limits of your own healing practices, of course. Another important thing, and I haven't been able to explore this more in depth, how, for example, the Ministry of Health or other stakeholders are taking up the WHO guidelines on traditional medicine. The WHO had in 2014 their 10-year strategic plan for integrating traditional, complementary, and integrative healthcare medicine in the healthcare system. But it's of course up to every country or every island in this case to use those guidelines as a starting point for policy making or for interventions. That is still an area that I want to further explore, but what you can see is this worldwide, global, more recognition for traditional healing practices. And this I also find interesting, the different terminologies being used, from alternative to complementary, where for me personally, when I think of complementary, it sounds way more holistic. It complements each other, while alternative in a way kind of like excludes the other one. And when talking to people about this research, you also feel that more resistance is being, that's my feeling, yeah? More resistance is being expressed when people talk about, but those are the alternative, that's the alternative circuit, compared to it complements. So that is just a side note that I wanted to mention. There are, of course, a number of barriers to that collaboration. Perceived illegitimacy toward and between traditional healers themselves. It is way less regulated, the traditional healing practices. There is not a school or a system. Traditional healers usually give their protocols, their procedures, their way of healing. They pass it over to generations under them or selected others. And they all have their own practice, their own way. They differ a lot from each other. Because of that, it is difficult to, I do get it, it's difficult to really understand the effectiveness of one healer, but also comparing them together. Yeah, there is this, next to this illegitimacy, there is also this lack of trust and skepticism toward biomedical practice. I find this personally quite difficult to capture within my research. It is more of an undertone, and especially the interviews where more trust have been built and more, yeah, people who are more knowledgeable express the racial debate, the decolonization, as one of a deeper rooted tension or aspect of trust towards white Western biomedical practice. It is there. It is there, and not to be dismissed. So referral of clients is currently geared towards traditional healers abroad rather than biomedical practitioners. There are many negative associations. Still, people call it primitive, witchcraft, that traditional healers take part in financial exploitation of people. It is satanic. So those negative connotations, they are there. And certain members of society are less open to talk about their practices because of fear of condemnation. Furthermore, lack of regulation, of course. Clear guidelines, standards, how to register traditional healers, and also coverage of traditional medicine remains complex because it is not, it is not regulated actually. But it is an important topic when you talk about integrative mental health care, integrative care. You have to talk about coverage. There are also these diverging thoughts on commercialization of traditional medicine. There are diverse interests as well. I don't know all details about these explicitly, but these have been mentioned, that certain traditional healing practices were, just serving a more economy profit purpose. In any case, what I do find is that a systemic approach is needed to understand this all more. And if a sort of a collaboration, to what extent it is, would to come about, we would need to look more into the effect or the influence of religion. Religion in general is deeply entangled in the entire educational but also political system. So back then I felt a little bit stuck because there were way more barriers for collaboration, and I had to take a break from this research. As I said before, I used my own personal circle to understand certain aspects, to build trust, but I went back and forth and I met different people. But I had to take a break from my research when my gatekeeper, who was a traditional healer, passed away. And I had difficulties in owning up to my aim, because I did feel like I am continuously in my interviews the one that is saying, let's move towards a collaboration, but not necessarily that there was one stakeholder that said, I have that ambition too, let me take over your hobby and take it up, you know? So yeah. In any case, I took a break from this research for 1.5 years approximately. And within that time, there was more happening worldwide. The Black Lives Movement, the Zwarte Piet discussion here in the Netherlands. Somehow more people from the Dutch Caribbean, the communities that were belonging to this research, started to think also more differently about health and healing and were verbal about it. So the taboo, it is still there, I think, but it is becoming less. The taboo to talk about mental health and the taboo to talk about traditional healing. There is this, I call it a camouflage society. It is also being referred to as syncretism. Syncretism is really that you can withhold more than one religion within you, multiple belief systems. It is there. It is very much there. And I think it's also one of the factors that contributed to the survival of the traditional healing. But these developments, they expose a certain degree of more deeper rooted inter and transgenerational trauma. And I say this very lightly because also this is quite difficult for even people within my circle to talk about. Once we are being confronted with our colonial history and we understand a little bit more of how traumas are being passed over, it becomes, it becomes difficult. People then are rethinking their identity and reforming it. And it needs to be addressed. And I think there are nowadays more researchers, more activists, more people talking about it. And what used to be called or referred to as the cultura de miedo, the culture of fear, is being softened maybe, or hopefully. Maybe that's also, I'm looking at the time, almost over time.
Well, I think when we round up for a little bit, then we can maybe have a break and then do the breakout sessions and then the Q&A. Of course, it's also, I know that many people have now lots of questions, so maybe in gently round up. So please do take your time, but
5 minutes?
Yeah, that's okay.
All right, so my most recent insights, because I just came back, and I must say that how I feel now towards my initial aim is completely, it's somewhere way more relaxed and way more content and way more in embracement of the traditional healing, because it's way more nuanced. How I reflect now, doing 5 years research from a distance on this topic, is that traditional healing, for example, in the field of psychiatry, it's way more embraced. The psychiatrists and psychologists that I spoke to see it as a normal part of their treatment to ask about traditional healing, if it happened or not. And they don't need to be under the same roof, but they do ask about it. It's normalized. This might not be the case for oncology, where the topic of traditional healing is way more heated and contested there. So there are nuances of how you would talk about traditional healing in the healthcare system. There is a growing interest among the population in self-care and healing, and especially, awareness of decolonization and its consequences. There is, what I see is that individual and collective healing in the now is less taboo, but it's important for us to realize that healing takes time. And on many levels, it needs to be addressed, but it takes time. There is also a less need to make the invisible collaboration visible. And I say the invisible collaboration visible because it always has coexisted. It has been there. We don't need to that I say to myself as this research, I don't need to have these people shake hands in front of each other to say there is a collaboration. Try to understand how it coexisted, how it empowers people, how it served to be as a strength to people is maybe more interesting to explore now. And one question that I continuously get asked and ask myself is, whose side am I? Am I representing the traditional healers or more of the biomedical practitioners? That is something that I am continuously asked. Anyway, moving forward, I think that exploring further the willingness for collaboration and how that might be for policymakers, for further acceptance, for the future of traditional healing on the island, that is something that still more need to ask themselves. Because I ask myself, for who am I doing this research ultimately? I do not necessarily want to do these findings and then they go into a drawer, you know? What do we want to achieve? And that's a question that I ask fellow people from the Dutch Caribbean. What do we want to achieve with traditional healing in the future? This is my final slide. It sums up what I find the research is for me up to now. There is this clove, two worlds. You have the Western biomedical, conventional medicine, however you would call it to feel more comfortable. That is a very organized, validated, embedded, and highly funded world, deciding at the moment what health is and what healthcare should be. Then there is quite scattered, there are many different names for them. From integrative, holistic, traditional, complementary, alternative, there might be even more. In any case, it is more fragmented. It's less organized, it is less or not validated, and it's continuously the argument for not working together, but they are there. Just as you can see in this picture, both sides are there. They coexist. And maybe for an oncology field, the difference is way bigger. And for psychology, it's way more here. But this is where I am currently with my research. And that is what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a very blessing to hear it and to become a little bit part of your journey, because to me, it feels like also a journey. I think for now, having a break is so nice, because then we can reflect on it and maybe we have some own thoughts about it. So what we can do now is some people of you had already raised some questions in the form to register. So maybe we can think about that and share it also with Durwin. But also there are two questions here being raised by Durwin. Maybe think about it, see a little bit how you reflect on it while having a break, get yourself a nice cup of tea, go smooching, do something with, with the ideal values we have been received. And then maybe we take more or less 10 minutes, try to be here at 9:05. And then after that, we're going to discuss this in a small, like more intimate setting. So we have this breakout session and we can discuss this, because I think when we talk about health, we should also talk about this in a more community setting. So not only reflect for yourself, but also try to share it. And that's the way how we as Indigenous always do, like we share what we have been taught. So, and then maybe we can pass it on to each other. So I see you in about 10 minutes. Think about the questions. We will share it later on again. And once we are here, we're going to start this breakout session. And after the breakout session, please hold your questions, because Durwin is here for the questions and maybe for the answers, or maybe we can just deliberate about it. So thank you so much for now. And I see you hopefully soon.